Hello, you're watching Scotland at 7 on Tuesday the 14th of December. I'm Hugh, Stewart. Now tonight our main story is to cover the coronavirus and the new measures which have been announced to deal with the Omicron variant. And shortly I'll be discussing those with our guest tonight, Peter Curran. And good evening, Peter. How are you today?
I'm moderately well, Hugh.
Well, that's reasonably good news. And so let's hope... but we can keep going till the end of the programme. So we're a bit late tonight, so if you've just joined us, we're going to go through the news for about an hour. We delayed it a bit because some of you may have been watching the First Minister's statement on the telly earlier on, so I think she's just finished now. And those are the points she raised are going to be discussed in a few minutes. But first of all, I'm going to begin with today's coronavirus update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 3,785,004 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs or the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 3,012,266 have been confirmed negative and 722,738 have tested positive. There are 3,117 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 6 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,725. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 541 were in hospital last night, 38 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 4,363,074 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,978,208 had received a second dose, and 2,200,172 have received their third booster dose. The latest UK daily figures show 146,627 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. That's an increase of 150 since yesterday. That number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. So before we turn to our guest, Peter Curran, we're going to summarise what the First Minister said today in her Omicron statement to Parliament. As Omicron continues to spread, the Scottish Government is setting out new guidance and measures to take effect from midnight this Friday to stem the flow of transmission, to keep businesses and services open, and to protect against pressures on health services. Evidence shows that the new highly transmissible Omicron strain of COVID-19 can infect those who have been vaccinated or previously infected. Therefore, it is considered necessary to reintroduce some precautions to prevent hospital admissions. Guidance has been updated on reducing social interaction at home or in indoor public places to a maximum of 3 households at any time, with everyone encouraged to take a lateral flow test before the meeting. This will also be reflected in updated guidance for visiting care homes, with no more than 2 households to visit a residence at a time, and in hospitals, no more than 2 visitors at any time. In all settings, people should take a lateral flow test before meeting to support people continuing to connect with their loved ones. An additional funding of £100 million to ensure the self-isolation support grant is available to those who need it was announced, and a £100 million financial package for eligible businesses will be made available. Business support funding has been allocated to enhance adherence to the necessary public health measures and support businesses in hospitality and food supply and in the cultural sector that have lost crucial bookings during this key trading period. The Finance Secretary will be engaging with affected sectors immediately to consult on and confirm the details of support, and money will be available as soon as possible. The COVID-19 booster programme continues to accelerate, with the online portal for 18 to 29-year-olds opening on Wednesday the 15th, that's tomorrow, and the waiting period following vaccination reduced from 15 minutes to 5 minutes. COVID-19 booster jags will be prioritised over the remainder of the flu vaccination programme to speed up vaccination times and enable more appointments. Further guidance on additional measures announced by the First Minister will be published by the end of the week. These include business service providers and places of worship asked to take all reasonable measures to avoid crowding, to encourage the wearing of masks, and to support distancing in their premises. This will include guidance to ensure that people who can work from home do so. For those in sectors where working from home is not possible, regular testing with lateral flow tests should be undertaken. Reinforcement of protective measures in retail and other settings, including distancing, managing customer flows and protective screens. Reinforcement of protective measures in hospitality settings, including the collection of contact tracing information and measures to reduce crowding. Guidance to increase mask wearing in outdoor crowded areas such as Christmas markets or festive celebrations. The Scottish Government's strong recommendation continues to be that everyone should take a lateral flow test beforehand and on any occasion that you might meet another household. That's an important way we can all reduce the risk of unknowingly spreading the virus to other people. It remains vitally important to strictly adhere to all public health advice, being stringent in the use of face coverings in all required settings, isolating for a full period when advised to, and ensuring good ventilation in spaces where households will mix. Okay, Peter, as I was reading that, I was aware there's quite a lot of detail, so I don't know if you were able to remember all of that. But first of all, in general, it seems that what the First Minister has announced is really a return to what we were doing about a year ago, but without the lockdown. So cafes, pubs, other premises will stay open, but they've been asked to just to make sure people don't bunch up, people don't crowd at the bar, and it's writing down people's names and addresses again. So, in your opinion, looking at the Omicron and its dangers, do you think this is adequate? Is it going too far, or is it about right? What's your view?
Well, Hugh, I appreciate the dilemmas that the First Minister faces, and indeed the UK government and any government in the world on this, that to institute stringent draconian measures, which may very well be necessary, also has a price to pay, and that's harming the economy and businesses. I mean, I would, in this err, very much on the side of caution. I just worry that there's a political element in deciding who you relax the rules with and who you tighten them with. The guiding principle has been that measures like these need the consent of the population. And if at all possible, they shouldn't be of the force of law as a baton behind them. But when that comes to public premises and public events, it's one thing saying, well, we don't have to prosecute every individual that doesn't wear a mask in a supermarket. It's quite another thing to say we don't have to take action against somebody who wants to run a rave in a huge venue with inadequate ventilation and close proximity without masks. It's a very difficult judgment to make. And she has a wider perspective than I have or anybody has of the issues. There is a marked tendency of all nations to short-termism and expediency. It's a very rare politician that can take the really hard decisions that they know might impinge on their personal popularity, their electoral prospects, because it's absolutely necessary. But these are the judgments that only the First Minister and our cabinet and our closest advisors can take. I do believe that the First Minister listens to expert advice. I'm not at all sure that the British government does that. It gives the appearance of doing it. So I can only say I wish they'd been a bit more severe. And for once, in terms of Nicola, I wish she'd been a little more cautious than less cautious.
Well, the full list of measures being recommended will be available on the media, and the First Minister, of course, made the speech to Parliament, and people can pick that up again on the Broadcasting Scotland website, and also she has addressed the whole nation on the media earlier on today. So to summarise, there's no lockdown. People shouldn't use that, but there is a tightening. Now, the First Minister used a phrase earlier on about the severity of Omicron. She used the phrase that it has a high attack rate. That's something I haven't heard people saying before, but just to underline really the dangers with Omicron. The attack rate means, as the First Minister said, if one person in the room has the new Omicron variant, it's quite likely that everyone else will have it if they stay in that room for long enough without ventilation. So that the attack rate means how quickly it jumps from one person to another. The First Minister also said today in Holyrood that it could well be that the Omicron variant actually has an R rate of 4. It reproduces at a factor of 4. And that's, of course, 4 times what we were used to with the Delta variant. So, yes, Peter, are you yourself up to now, right? Have you been particularly worried about the Omicron? Are you taking any particular measures to avoid people from other households because of this very high attack rate, as the First Minister called it?
Well, we're essentially, I'm on a main street for a start, and we have good relationships with our neighbours in an extended fashion. We have a fine, relatively new bistro on the main street, Ficos, which I was frequenting because I believe it's important, and it's big, high ceilinged, well ventilated. I'm really going back to the mood I was in the early months of 2020. I'm being very cautious. Yes, we have neighbours visit us occasionally in ones or twos. I don't want to fall into the Tory trap and saying they can't be a threat because I know them. They don't have to wear a mask. But I'm not asking people to wear a mask in the house. But I will be opening windows. I will be keeping a safe distance. And coming from a touchy-feely family and having touchy-feely neighbours, I'll be resisting my natural inclination to greet people and hug them. And I'm not an air kisser, but so I'm being cautious.
So I think we have to cock-a-nate, and that's the thing to remember. I think throughout this winter, we shouldn't forget that what the First Minister is emphasising is that it's all about protecting a health service. We did read out earlier on. We've got to stop the hospitals being overwhelmed. And even if this variant turns out to be less deadly, and we don't know that yet, the First Minister did emphasise, maybe it's milder, maybe it's not, we just don't know. We're going to have to wait, I hear, at least another 2 weeks before we know about that. Yeah, Peter?
Yeah. Could I come back to the attack rate? The attack rate, as I understand it, means that if 10 people go into a room and one has COVID, when they leave that room, at least 5, maybe 7, and maybe all of them will have COVID. Now, you only have to say if everyone that then acquired COVID went into another group of 10, the exponential potential of that is really terrifying. And you don't have to have much more than the arithmetic of a bookies runner to know that that can be a lethal threat. In all of these things, I feel we don't boil our message down hard enough to examples that the ordinary person in the street will grasp immediately. And certainly the health professionals did make a lot of the attack rate, but we need to hammer that home. We need to stop people in their tracks. I mean, I've had a dialogue with people on that since these statements were made, and they're initially being dismissive, and I think it's probably all over and it's not very severe. And I confronted them with that little analogy, and they said, oh, it's as bad as that. And I said, remember the law of large numbers. If we have large numbers of infections, even if, and it's a very big if, not confirmed in any way, that they're relatively mild in comparison to the Delta variant, etc., the sheer weight of these numbers can overwhelm our health service. And people will die because of Omicron, but not because they have it, but because they're not receiving other essential treatment, and overstressed medical professionals are under strain, or they just are not there in enough numbers to cope. So I don't think it's anything to muck about. When we were at the peak of Delta, one informed far-seeing commentator, I can't remember who it was, says, I've considered the awful possibility that Delta is just a dress rehearsal for the main event, which is coming at us. And for all we know, Omicron is a continuing dress rehearsal for the main event. There may be worse to come. And I think...
Yeah, we've had several variants up to now, so there's no reason to be optimistic that it's going to be away anytime soon. So that we must move on, Peter. There's more on this general topic that we're going to discuss, and the next thing we'd like to look at is the booster programme. Both UK and Scottish governments have been putting into place measures to make sure that the third dose or the booster is accelerated. A range of measures are being introduced to speed up the COVID-19 booster programme and to give protection against the spreading Omicron variant. The online booking portal will be opening to everyone aged 18 to 29 from 10 a.m. tomorrow, that's the 15th of December, allowing this age group to book booster appointments through the NHS Inform website. Appointments are being added to the online portal daily, and COVID-19 vaccination capacity is being increased over the festive period. In order to increase the number of appointments, there's also going to be a prioritisation of booster vaccines over the flu programme. This means that anyone who's under the age of 65 or not in one of the high-risk groups will receive only the COVID-19 booster and not the flu jab. This group will instead be able to get the flu vaccine later in the new year. In line with the advice from all 4 UK chief medical officers, and in order to improve the flow of people through the vaccination centres, people will no longer have to wait 15 minutes after receiving the mRNA vaccine. Instead, in Scotland, the programme Clinical Governance Group has recommended that there's an observation period of 5 minutes, reflecting guidance from the Resuscitation Council. Also, all NHS board areas are working to increase the availability of drop-in clinics, with a particular focus on the over 40s, and to identify larger sites that can be brought online in the coming weeks. Okay, so quickly, Peter, so obviously we're going to be expanding the numbers of people getting the third or booster. Now, the First Minister again reminded Parliament today that Scotland has proportionately already distributed more of the third jags than anybody else. But there are moves here to increase. Okay, do you think that, again, is this the right thing to be doing? What is happening mainly is that we're trying to speed the flow of people through the vaccination centres. 5 minutes should be fine, right? Get your jag, 5 minutes, then get out, right? Again, do you think we're doing the right kind of thing here in terms of how much we're putting into it?
Yes, I do. My own personal experience of receiving the jags and then going for the booster confirmed that. I was, if you like, one of the unfortunates that went for some of the first Ingleston mass jags. And the Ingleston Centre, of course, is a massive centre. And I was there for 3.5 hours queuing with people in wheelchairs collapsing. We're going around like snakes and ladders. And the medical professionals and the helpers were doing their very best. But it was not an ideally coordinated operation. It was very, very fatiguing. My wife and I both got the AstraZeneca vaccine. At that time, we thought that was adequate. We now find the Pfizer would have given infinitely better protection. But my wife and I got different booster jabs, not on the same day. She simply accompanied me. I got the Moderna vaccine booster. And then I was called back for another booster, and having tracked along again, it turned out to be a mistake. And I understand these things happen under the pressure. So I'm wondering, what are we going to have a chain here of people receiving initial vaccines from one pharmaceutical company's product, then the booster from a second, and perhaps then another booster from the third? And the question of the life of the boosters, when do you need a booster on the booster? There was even a question when I was receiving my Moderna booster, given the fact that I'm in an at-risk group because of age and background medical history, that I may be called back for a second booster of the Moderna. In other words, a booster and the booster. So there's a lot that's not clear, but I'm sure it's absolutely the right thing. Vaccination is really the only thing that's offered real hope, and it has already delivered massive benefits. And I don't think there should be any messing about with this. We have to do it.
Well, the third booster has been rolled out very successfully in Scotland at the moment. The First Minister was asked today by opposition members whether they should reopen mass testing or do mobile mobile testing in the regions. And the First Minister said that first of all there already is mobile facilities are already available, and vaccination. I mean, mobile vaccination is already available in the rural areas. And also, as for going one particular route, the First Minister simply said that we'll use whatever methods are most effective, most efficient in each area. So just by speeding up the flow through the testing centres, that's going to increase the uptake of the third booster. So I'm just going to move on to a final aspect of the COVID-19.
Before you move on, Hugh, please.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
As far as I know, there's been no third booster. There's only one booster. There was the initial double jabbing and booster.
I'm being inaccurate with my language. I mean the third or booster jag is what I'm referring to. So I've only had one booster. Yeah, the third jag in total is what I'm talking about, Peter. So let's look at the COVID-19 cases caught by early testing. I'll just read this out without, I don't know if there's any controversy here, but the government tells us today that thousands of COVID-19 cases have been detected by the asymptomatic testing programme, according to a Scottish Government evaluation. More than 6.6 million LFD results reported by Scots were considered in the asymptomatic testing evaluation programme, which looked at 9 testing pathways, including community testing, early learning and childcare settings, and a health and social care workforce. The number of positive cases identified by LFD testing, then confirmed by PCR, was 7,271, according to the study, which looked at the period between November last year and June 2021. The data shows widespread uptake of testing among the general population through the pathways, including the universal offer. So I'll just move on, Peter, unless you've got any comment on that, to the COVID public inquiry. Now, it's been announced today what the... Okay, so... sorry, Peter, did you have anything to say about the asymptomatic testing before the next topic?
Well, having done my first lateral flow test at home, and being somebody who has a very pronounced gag reflex, I found it moderately stressful. But I wish people would be more clear. I know they've tried very hard, but tried to be clear on what the difference is with the various types of tests, the lateral flow test, self-administered, and PCR tests and other tests. I would like more clarity on that front. But I think certainly self-testing at home is important. Unfortunately, like anybody else, I sent off for a supply of lateral flow tests, got a 7-day supply, which I thought that lasts me forever. And we're now being advised to do it daily, but there's a national shortage of them. So that's one.
Yep. Well, on the subject of testing availability, it certainly looks like there's been a huge increase in demand, particularly this week, as, of course, news of Omicron has spread. And there was a general shortage. Now, one thing the First Minister pointed out today was that if you applied online to get stuff delivered to you, it wasn't working last night. We did try, actually, and the online ordering system said none available. But the First Minister said that has been fixed. So she told us today you can order online. Now, it should be possible to pick them up in any chemist. You can actually look up online and see which chemist currently has stocks. So yes, there certainly was a problem with supply, but I think that's because of a huge surge in demand that happened earlier this week. But First Minister says that we are on top of that at the moment. So let's hope, by the way, Peter, we can get hold of the new one, which Jason Leach referred to last Friday on the radio. He was saying there's a new one which you don't have to tickle your tonsils with, just the nasal one will do. So I'm looking for some of those. Right, so let's look at the public inquiry. Now, I don't have a great deal to say about that because it hasn't happened yet, but the public inquiry is going to look into the general handling of the coronavirus right from the start, back in January of last year. And so what's happened today is the terms of reference and the chair for the public inquiry have been announced. In a statement to Parliament today, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, confirmed that the Honourable Lady Poole QC, who's a Senator of the College of Justice in Scotland, will chair the inquiry. Mr Swinney also published the terms of reference for the inquiry covering 12 areas of investigation, each covering a strategic element of the handling of the pandemic, to identify lessons to be learned and recommendations as soon as practicable. The terms of reference were informed by public engagement and are subject to a period of reflection by the Chair, who will be able to suggest adjustments, which may include taking the remit of the UK-wide COVID inquiry into account. The period covered from the inquiry is from the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of December 2022, but it will also consider pandemic planning undertaken prior to this. The Chair will now begin the process of appointing staff so that the inquiry can begin considering evidence without delay. Okay, so Peter, looking at the inquiry then, so the terms of reference, what does all this mean? So I think those are the topics that the inquiry has to look into. So I've just had a quick glance at it today. That will include discharge of patients into the care homes. It'll include the whole strategic planning of how well did we address this unprecedented pandemic. So as I said, we'll have to wait and see what happens. We're just announcing that the inquiry is being set up. So have you any comment on it so far?
Well, a comment on inquiries such as this in general and one or two specifics in this. Inquiries are set up, whatever they publicly say about them, with one of two objectives: to really fundamentally get at the truth, and if there's been malfeasance or neglect or inadequacy, to make sure that the people guilty of it experience some penalty. The other type of inquiry is simply a form of delay, kicking into the long grass and throwing smoke bombs right and left to try and protect the people who are structuring the inquiry know are culpable. Clearly, I hope that this inquiry is of the former thing. But one thing I would say, let me give you an analogy from safety in industry. Every year of my life, and I've been involved in dangerous factories such as the rubber industry, petrochemical industry, etc., people have died because of neglect of the employer. And hands are wrung and lessons are going to be learned. And they rarely are, for quite one simple reason. To my knowledge, in Britain, no director of a company has been prosecuted as an individual for corporate manslaughter. Now, there clearly is the potential for neglect in the COVID inquiry and the life of COVID from 2020. We know that thousands, indeed millions of people have died as a result of this. So I hope this inquiry is rigorous. I know that the Good Law Project has done wonderful work in conjunction with the Runnymede Trust. I think it was today or maybe tomorrow, are going to the High Court on this question of the allocation of COVID contracts to the Friends of Friends list, and they've been quite explicit of where their criticisms lie. So I'll be fascinated to see if that comes out before or during the inquiry, and how, if at all, it influences the rigour of that inquiry.
Yes, I see what you mean. I'm thinking on inquiries of the past. Well, the Grenfell Tower inquiry is still going on, and hopefully that's one of the former kind, which will produce tighter regulations and greater safety in the future. I suppose also looking back historically at things like football ground safety, again, inquiries there that produce a tightening of health and safety. But yes, I can certainly imagine plenty of examples of the other kind, the kicking it into the long grass kind. I wonder if the inquiry into the Downing Street parties of last year fits into category A or category B. That remains to be seen, Peter. Let's keep an open mind on that. Now, finally on COVID for tonight, we also had today a UK government announcement of extra COVID funding for the devolved administrations. Now, I'm going to read out what happened, and then we're going to discuss, Peter, something very interesting, which is the timing of this announcement. So, additional funding from the UK Reserve will be made available to the governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to progress their vaccine rollout and the wider health response. The UK government confirmed today in a press release issued just as the First Minister rose to make her statement in the Scottish Parliament. This additional in-year Barnett funding will not be confirmed until early 2022 through the supplementary estimates process. However, the UK Treasury today announced that additional funding will be made available to the devolved administrations to provide greater certainty and to allow them to plan as they tackle COVID-19 during the crucial weeks ahead. The UK Treasury will set this amount of additional funding in the coming days and will keep it under review in the following weeks. If the amount of funding provided up front to each devolved administration is more than the Barnett consequentials, confirmed at supplementary estimates, then any extra amount will be repaid in the year 22 to 23 or over the spending review period if necessary. Okay, there's a couple of points here, Peter. First of all, I'd like to explain what I meant by the timing of this thing, because as we were making up the news script for tonight, and as we were listening to the First Minister speaking, we received this press release from the UK Treasury. I've timed it here. It came in at 2:02. And the First Minister was already in the statement in the chamber, and she rose to speak just a few minutes after that. Now, I was noting what the First Minister said, and she made the point of the £100 million that Kate Forbes had found from reserves. The First Minister made the point that we would like to do more, but our hands are tied because it's up to the UK Treasury. So the First Minister didn't know that at that very moment the UK Treasury had just made this announcement about extra funding. I wonder, Peter, why they couldn't have released that press release at 10 o'clock this morning. What do you think?
Well, knowing the way the Boris government, operates in these things, Boris simply comes up with the last idea that comes into his head. I mean, I once had a boss many years ago, and people said to me, if you want to get anything done, be sure you're the last person in the door, because he'll simply relate to the last bit of information that he had. Now, there was a very interesting program today of Politics Live, which is a program which is very influential. I know the political parties worry about it, and it was fascinating because it had three Scots on it today. It had, of course, an egregious example of the Tory, I wouldn't call him a grandee, Tobias Elwood, and what we got from him was to be expected. It had Fraser Nelson of The Spectator, a Scot, but it also had Aisha Hazarika, who was a former comedian and then I think parliamentary candidate and very strong Labour advocate, and our own Kirsten Oswald. And Kirsten Oswald there was a clear union, the broad shoulders of the union sub-agenda running on this, that, Scotland couldn't survive this, couldn't compensate because they are too poor and too poor even to be independent. This was all running through it. And Kirsten Oswald was trying to get across the simple point that Scotland is on a fixed budget and that we cannot raise the wind or print money like it was going out of style as the UK government could do. I believe the possibility exists that Boris or some of his advisors actually reacted to that programme. It may be an outlier possibility, but knowing Boris, it's entirely within the realm of possibility, and I think that may account for the sudden late announcement.
It was also, however, announced earlier on clearly to Douglas Ross of the Scottish Conservatives, because he immediately rose up and in his first question he asked the First Minister if she welcomed this extra spending from Rishi Sunak, which had only been announced, as I said, at 2:02 while everyone was in the parliamentary chamber. So obviously the Tories in the Scottish Parliament knew this announcement was going to be made, but as a courtesy they didn't inform the Scottish Government about that. So in fact, while she was speaking, the First Minister was passed a note, I think from John Swinney, and that's the first she heard of it, while she was actually in mid-floor.
Can I ask when Douglas Ross made his announcement? What time?
Well, that was his first question after the First Minister finished her statement. The first question from Douglas Ross was about this new spending.
Yeah, but you remember that Politics Live goes on at 12:15. They were addressing this issue from 12:15.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see that anyway, but the official press release, which I have here, is time-stamped at 2:02.
I understand that, but you seem to be suggesting that Douglas Ross had announced it before the Politics Live programme went out.
No, what I'm suggesting is that Douglas Ross clearly knew about it, and therefore that was the subject matter of his first question. So it looks as if he was trying to wrong foot the First Minister by saying that I know more about this than you do. So just a trick, But but the funding wasn't as no, the funding probably wasn't announced specifically on Pro because it wasn't
That's
in the
my
press
whole,
release until later.
that's my whole point.
Ah.
That Joe Coburn and Politics Live have got their antenna waving very effectively. And if there was a subtext of that, Tobias Elwood would have known, and they would have known. And I don't think they would have hesitated.
Yes, I see what you mean. So yeah, well, I think I agree with you there. Obviously, there were two different channels of communication. One of them was the official one, and the First Minister wasn't in that one, wasn't in that particular loop. Just finally, at that point, of course, you stressed the political nature of this announcement, and on the back of the press release from the UK Treasury, Chancellor Rishi Sunak said, "Throughout this pandemic, the United Kingdom has stood together as one family, and we will continue to do so." So clearly the Chancellor obviously is spelling out the broad shoulders argument that you alluded to earlier on. Okay, now I think that everything's political in this whole business. Now, no doubt we will return to some of these topics again. I'm going to look at the next story now, which is we've also had an announcement moving on from COVID for tonight. The labour market statistics from August to October of this year, October 21. In the period, that quarter from August to October, Scotland's estimated employment rate rose over the quarter to 74.6%, while the estimated unemployment rate fell to 4.1%. Separate HMRC early estimates show that 2.4 million employees are working in Scotland. That's by November 21, which is 16,000 more than in February 20, prior to the pandemic. Commenting on the latest publication of ONS labour market statistics, the Employment Minister Richard Lochhead said, "We are all too aware of the continuing impact and economic uncertainty that COVID is having, and that's why we are doing all we can to limit the spread of the virus and mitigate the effects it has on our economy. The 2022 to 23 Scottish budget invests an additional £68.3 million in employability and training to help businesses address skills shortages and create high-quality, sustainable jobs. Spending in this area is targeted at all sectors and social groups, including people currently furthest from employment, so that everyone and every region can benefit from Scotland's economic transformation. To accelerate the potential of digital technology, £192 million is allocated to improve connectivity and boost the digital economy, including specific support for small and medium-sized businesses." Peter, I'd like to look at this from two aspects. First of all, the general unemployment numbers. I suppose that's pretty good, really, if there's more people employed now than there were at the start of a pandemic. Because of the time of year, of course, clearly unemployment tends to be higher in the winter. So if unemployment numbers are actually down in December, does that look like good news to you?
Well, I'm some years distance from my direct involvement in this kind of thing when I was in human resources, and the exact manner in which the employment statistics are calculated, which I used to know like the back of my hand, I've forgotten. But remember that employment rates can be caused by a form of churning, and you've referred to that, Hugh, and fluctuation. For example, the seasonal industries like the agricultural industry and the hiring of temporary labour can cause turbulence, if you like, seen as positive or negative. Exactly the same happens to much equally vital sector of industry, the construction industry. Now, it may be that the waxing and waning of confidence among employers, and in fact the loss of employees due to illness and sickness and isolation, we can't underrate. I don't think there's been a proper analysis of the impact of the measures to contract COVID and the impact of COVID on people's health, on employment. So it's very hard to judge. Yes, on the face of it, it seems good. And I prefer it looked as if it was up than it looked as if it was down. But these figures need a lot more forensic statistical analysis before you could say anything with confidence.
Yes, there's been a lot of adjustment over the years, and as you say, in the definitions of unemployment. The other side I'll just maybe comment on very briefly is the whole question of skills shortage and skills development. So again, the statement from the Scottish Government talks about further investment of, I think it was 68 million in skills development. So is this another evidence of moving into the new economies of the future, looking at new types of jobs, new types of skills that we will need as we go ahead?
Yeah, failure in skills development has been a constant theme throughout my career, again in human resource management. I remember way back a conference at Tinto where somebody was assessing there was no skills gap in the Scottish economy. And as they said that, all the lights went out, and then a number of hotel functionaries came in and ran around the room with circuit testing screwdrivers and spanners and did SFA. And one guy said dryly, "There's your skills shortage, John." So we've been very bad at, first of all, identifying what skills we need, and secondly, providing for them. Let me give you another example. Marketing men are a peculiar breed in every respect, their dress and their view of life. And when I was working with the whiskey industry, this marketing guy, what I call a stripe shot marketing guy, went to, I think it was the Lagavulin distillery, and said, "We urgently need another 60,000 cases of 12-year-old Lagavulin." And the distillery manager said, "Had you told me that 16 years ago, sir, I might have been able to help you." So I think that sort of attitude and that the brutal realism of the man on the ground has to be brought to bear on skills shortages. But yes, it may well be a result of all that's happened. It may, in some areas, be a result of people deciding to desert fundamental areas of employment because the stresses on them are too great and the rewards are, and recognition are simply not adequate. I mean, I'm sure we're losing people, nurses, doctors from the health service every day because of that, and the fire service, and all our fundamental services. So skills analysis, job specification, person specification, and the proper educational and training provisions are all part of a vital coordinated mix. And it's vital to any society that they're bang on top of this.
Yep, as the society evolves, and of course, as we move into the net zero carbon, which I believe we are doing, yep, obviously some jobs will go and they have to be replaced. Of course, that's what the Just Transition Programme is all about, but it's all about the detail, of course, as you say, Peter. Now, we're going to move on. On the subject of climate change, our next story is about a statement today from climate expert Professor Stewart Hazeldine, who's told the Scottish Parliament's Net Zero Committee that the UK government's decision not to back carbon capture is fundamentally detrimental and serious, in his words. Whilst giving evidence to the committee, Professor Hazeldine, the world's first professor of carbon capture, utilisation and storage, and the leader of the UK's largest academic CCS research group, said that the project needs to be funded now if Scotland is to meet its 2045 net zero target. Professor Hazeldine stressed that the Westminster decision not to fund the Acorn project prevents Scotland enacting CO2 capture and storage within the time required to meet its world-leading targets. The climate expert went on to say that there was no advantage of being given the status of a reserve bidder, as Westminster has done for the Scottish cluster of proposed carbon capture, utilisation and storage projects. It merely means a lot of meetings and requires companies to run on the spot with very little or no funding, and it prevents them from generating other opportunities in the meantime. Okay, so this is a story we've reported on before, so in case anyone wasn't listening, we're referring first of all to the Fergus Acorn scheme. This is the project which has a plan, and it's got a coordinating engineering company looking over it all, but it doesn't have any money and it doesn't have any permission from the UK government. Now, the project, just very simply, Peter, is the project of St Fergus in Aberdeen to basically convert a lot of old oil and gas infrastructure towards the carbon capture project. So it was waiting to go ahead. All the gear is there. The people are waiting to get the go ahead, and they've been told to wait. They've been told to wait in the reserve. They're maybe going to get the call in 2030. So there's no urgency, is there?
I think there's absolute urgency in this. Can I just have a brief anecdote on this? It's called the Acorn Project. When I worked for Scottish Newcastle in Chorley in the mid-70s, there was a huge barn near Chorley called Rivington Barn on a site known as Rivington Pike, which was the family seat of the Pilkington Glass Company. And this was a Saxon tithe barn with a roof which looked as if it was wood or something. It was actually stone. And it was used as a venue. It was a huge, wonderful venue. And we went in there, and the roof was supported by oak trees in the middle of the room with their branches supporting the roof. These oak trees had been planted 100 years before with a plan to have them harvested, and as they were growing, they were distorted subtly by trees to build a barn in 100 years' time. And this was a medieval long-term planning with a vengeance. We don't seem to be able to plan or see beyond the end of our nose, if not the next by-election at the moment. I mean, carbon capture is absolutely vital. Well, my friend Bob Glenn is a tireless activist in street stalls, doors, and everything else for independence. Also does the very practical thing at his own expense and huge consumption of his own time, goes around planting trees to reforest, at least he can say, a bit of Scotland. And I said to him the other day, when all my words and the words of politicians have been forgotten, your trees planted will be helping Scotland and nature to breathe. I mean, this is utter folly. And whether it's just incompetence or some malign way of defining the constitutional argument, I don't know. I really was shocked to the core by this when I heard it.
Well, I remember at the time on the radio, Douglas Ross of the Scottish Conservatives was asked why was the St Fergus project, well, it wasn't cancelled, it was put on hold. And he said, there are reasons, there are very important reasons, which we will hear in due course. So we'll let you know as soon as we hear what those are, Peter. Right, we better move on again. UK government's Human Rights Act plans are dangerous. We're referring here to the UK government's proposals to replace the Human Rights Act with a new British Bill of Rights. These pose a serious threat to human rights and to fundamental freedoms across the whole of the UK. In the words of Justice Secretary Shona Robertson, responding to today's publication of a UK government consultation paper on replacing the Human Rights Act, Ms Robertson reiterated the Scottish Government's robust opposition to any attempt to undermine or weaken the protections provided by the Act. The Human Rights Act is one of the UK's most significant pieces of legislation. It's a central pillar of Scotland's devolved constitution, and the Scottish Government has consistently said there must be no changes to the Human Rights Act without the explicit consent of the Scottish Parliament. As a direct result of the Act, people have been able to obtain justice by asking the Scottish, English, Welsh or Northern Irish courts to uphold their human rights. The Act has been instrumental in holding public authorities to account and ensuring that the rights of individual families and communities are respected and protected. Ms Robertson said, today's proposals from the UK government are a politically motivated attack on human rights, fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. Peter, what confuses me about the current Conservatives' attitude to human rights is that the Human Rights Act is actually from the European human rights legislation, which was mainly put in place after World War II, wasn't it? And it was mainly drawn up by British lawyers. So why did the British think human rights were important in the 1950s, but they want to walk away from it now? Have you any idea why they want to do this?
Well, first of all, can I plant my flag in the ground and say I totally reject the term British being applied to me or to any of the component nations of the disunited kingdom. British is a geographical term, no more, no less than that. And British for me has become a dirty word in the mouth of a lot of people. British values, British this, British this, it's British. Can I use a Latin word here, bollocks spelt with an X? So what they're doing is any form of legislation to restrict the ability of big business to make money with no regard to the health, safety, and welfare of their people is an impediment to the Tory party's raison d'etre, which is to make money for a very small group of people. So businesses, I mean, I've worked for big businesses, and we, in the sense of the corporation, was not happy about any legislation that restricted the absolute discretion of management to do things. I worked in a dangerous industry, the tire and rubber industry, vulnerable to dust explosion, fire, machines which could maim you by simply moving your arm in the wrong direction. And they didn't have the word now that would have been used to describe any attempts at safety or a human environment. These people are just woke. But I think, frankly, the Conservative Party regards the human rights laws and any attempts to invoke them as woke. I mean, go back to the days of Magna Carta and habeas corpus. Yes, there were vital rights to be protected then, but they weren't under the kind of threat we are from big business. All over the government. We know the appalling things that have been perpetrated by big business. So this is an attempt to disassemble the essential rights. And the concept of human rights being in the hands of a Tory government makes as much sense to me as the NHS being in their hands. Both prospects terrify me.
Yes, this is Dominic Raab's announcement that the UK government intends to look again at human rights and, as Peter said, replace European or remember, human rights we celebrated last Friday, of course. We're celebrating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I note the difference between universal and British rights, as you say. Right? Let's just have universal rights. That covers everyone. So moving on, because we're late enough tonight, Peter. And have you had your tea yet, by the way?
Oh, yes, I've had my tea.
All right, so you're not in a rush. Right.
Well, just an observation. George V once was asked what his recipe for kingship was, and he said, never miss an opportunity to take a leak, which must be very important for us. And my motto is never lose an opportunity to eat before you're asked to do something important.
Well, that's my attitude. Yeah, eat as much in the time available. That's me. So we're going to move on to across the Atlantic now. A story that everyone was looking at back in January. We've heard today that Washington D.C., the actual state or the city of is that a city or is that a state? Anyway, you can tell me in a minute, Peter. But Washington D.C. is actually going to sue some right-wing groups, specifically the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Are right-wing groups in America, and they're actually going to be sued as a civil litigation by Washington D.C. It has today sued right-wing groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, seeking to collect on the financial costs of the deadly January 6th attack on the US Capitol and its aftermath. The lawsuit aims to hold accountable the groups who helped to organise a rally by thousands of supporters of ex-President Trump, which evolved into an assault on the Congress, aiming to stop it from certifying Joe Biden's election victory. The District of Columbia Attorney General Karl Racine told reporters that defendants had caused physical and financial harm to Washington and its residents, adding that the city will seek severe financial penalties against these defendants. Our intent is to hold these violent mobsters and these violent hate groups accountable and get every penny of damage we can, he said at a news conference. The lawsuit seeks to recover the cost of deploying hundreds of city police officers to defend the Capitol against the attack, as well as medical and paid leave costs incurred afterwards. It also brings civil assault and battery charges against the two organisations, along with 30 named and 50 unnamed people it alleges were involved in the assault. The lawsuit opens up another legal front against the alleged participants of the January 6th attack. So I think that makes it clear, yeah. My confusion has been clarified as I read the story. So it's the city of Washington, D.C. And there are separate legal proceedings, of course. People were killed, as our report makes it clear, during that attack, including police officers. So there will be criminal proceedings already happening. But this is an attempt to get the money back for the huge costs so that the state is getting it both ways. So I think, Peter, the issue here surely is about the massive schism that's opened up in American society. I was reading last week that people like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, very small in number, but those tens of thousands who turned up in Washington, D.C., they weren't all actually members of those right-wing groups. There are Americans who just feel that something's going wrong, that they're losing something. What do you think is behind the general split that's happening in American society?
Well, the general split is very serious when you got highly respected think tanks like the Brookings Institute and the New York Review saying that they believe American democracy may be disintegrating and it's under threat as it's never been before from within, not from without, not from the baddies without. You realize how serious it is. I think this is just an example of the American instinct is to look for redress through the law. And predominantly that means financial redress, because Americans realistically say, well, we can threaten people with loss of reputation. We can even threaten them with the courts, and the justice system may exonerate them because of the rigorous demands of proof. But it tends to be that civil legislation for damages doesn't require the same burdens of truth. I mean, any good episode of Law and Order, the fabulous American series, played this out in many respects. Well, the big companies, pharmaceutical companies, were immune to the reputation thing and all the rest of it. When you told them that what might happen was they'd be fined several $1 million and a class action suite might multiply that, God knows how many fold, they sat up and took notice. And bear in mind that American politics, all politics, but especially American politics, runs on money. So if you hit these people in the pocket, even if they never go to jail, you've damaged their capacity to campaign. So I think it's just Americans are compulsive litigators, and this applies to the law. And good luck to them with it.
Yes, as you said, that there are internal problems with American democracy, and it seems that Donald Trump also is employing currently a lot of lawyers, not only to deal with his own personal issues, but again, I read in the American press last week, he's employing hundreds of lawyers to fight the 24 election campaigns. So it looks like, in a way, you might say that democracy seems to have been handed over to the lawyers. So the winner will be the one who has the best lawyers. So that is. But do you know anything about that? Have you read about the way the Trump campaign is going on, and they are actually going to fight the next election campaign in the courts? They're going to try and overturn the election in 24 should they lose it.
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside the fact that Trump is a narrow, in many respects, unintelligent, narrowly focused conspiracy theorist, it was highly unlikely he would let go of what he saw as his successful attempt to subvert the American Constitution, the rule of law, through the law, and if not through that, by direct violence and the assault on Capitol Hill. He's not going to give it up. And the average Trump supporter, from what I can gauge of what their public spokespeople say, what they say in individual vox pop, has not got the most penetrating understanding of what democracy constitutes or the rule of law or anything else much. So they will back him. But it is a terrifying project. And I have to say, Joe Biden, although I wish him well, I think he's a decent man, hugely experienced man, that his presidency has certainly not been a particular success so far. A lot of it is due to the way he's been frustrated by the Supreme Court and by other elements of Republican power. The Republican Party, the so-called grand old party, yes, it was of the right and people would accept that, but it had its roots back in the Civil War and all the rest of it. And it had some respectability as truly American and a party of democracy and law. It's become what the Tory party in Britain has become.
So, well, that's yes. I don't know if there's a word for it though, but lawyers, as you say, are definitely playing a prominent role in various aspects of American politics. So we're going to finish up now with back at home. We've heard from the Scottish Government today the announcement of the long-awaited deposit return scheme. The UK's first deposit return scheme is going to go live across Scotland from the 16th of August 2023. helping to recycle billions of bottles and cans every year. The announcement follows an independent review which considered the impact of COVID-19 on that scheme. Addressing Parliament, the Circular Economy Minister set out plans for a phased implementation of the scheme and said that the target of achieving 90% collection rates by 2024 will be maintained. As part of the phased implementation, the Scottish Government is working with retailers on a voluntary basis to enable people to start returning their bottles and cans for recycling from November 2022. The Circular Economy Minister Lorna Slater said that this will be the first scheme of its kind in the UK and one of the most environmentally ambitious and accessible in Europe. Back to the future, Peter, with bottle recycling, but also cans as well. Do you welcome this initiative?
Yes, indeed, and it brings back very happy memories of my East End Denison childhood when raking the midges, as we call it, and the midges were the middens, the backyard middens. Indeed, the men that removed the thing were called the scavengers in our neck of the woods. And I often financed the ability to go to the local cinema from the bottles. And there was no doubt for a working class family, when you bought a bottle of ginger, as we called it, Tizer or whatever it was, American cream soda, you sure as hell didn't throw the bottle away. You took it back. To scavenge the middens, we had to go up to the drive in Glasgow, Broom Park Drive, up the relics of the old Denison estate, the enclosed estate, because these people could afford to throw their bottles out, in the process, of course, unleashing a whole rampage of small, torn-arse Glaswegians like me scavenging for bottles. So I think it's important. I think it matters.
And it is, of course, all about, as you said, reducing the amount of rubbish we throw away, because it should, in fact, make well, it should be a way of getting rid of plastic. You can either put your ginger in plastic, or you can put it in glass. Now, as long as you don't break the glass, it's actually, in theory, almost 100% recyclable. You know, you could, in theory, use the same amount of glass year in and year out and not have to dig up any more, or dig up any more sand. I think that's where they make it from. So maybe that's okay. Yeah, something just coming in. Yep. Did it go through? So I'm just hearing just now in Westminster they're discussing. This is on vaccine passports. Yes, right now, Peter, I'm just hearing that in Westminster, of course, the MPs have been discussing bringing in something like what we have in Scotland, Prime Minister Johnson's so-called Plan B on coronavirus mitigation. So I've just heard right now 100 Tory MPs have voted against the government, against the extension of the COVID passport scheme, which is basically to be what happened today, what's been happening up to now in Scotland. So the odd position we're having in here, I don't know who voted, but 100 MPs have voted against the Tory line. But the combined votes of the opposition, which I presume means Labour plus SNP. So I don't know who voted for it, though, but I guess the SNP must have voted with the government to get their COVID measures passed. That's strange times. So all the opposition, in fact, including the SNP, voted to save Boris Johnson's scheme. Now, I never thought that would be coming up in the news today. Do you think the SNP is right to vote on this one? It's, after all, an English issue.
Oh, I don't really want to get into that with you, for the simple fact, if I get into what is right for SNP Westminster MPs to do in Westminster, it opens up a whole can of worms about what their role should be. I mean, frankly, the way we behaved in Westminster in relation to Brexit, I thought, after the Brexit vote I'm talking about, was totally misjudged. And that was Nicola's misjudgment. I don't really want to get into that.
Yes, I see. I know. But anyway, that is the news tonight anyway. So Boris Johnson's COVID mitigation measures have passed in Westminster with the support of Labour, Liberal Democrats and SNP. The point, I guess, Peter, is that the SNP will say this is one of those English measures which would impact on Scotland, so they feel that they did in fact have a stake in it. Normally, an SNP member in Westminster wouldn't vote on something that was only about England, but if it has effects across the border, then they will feel they should take part in that. So that's the final news just in tonight. So Boris Johnson's measures to mitigate against COVID have passed Westminster with the support of the opposition and 100 Conservative MPs refusing to support the government. So that's about it for tonight. I'm sorry it's a bit late. We were delayed by the First Minister's speech on the telly to underline the measures that she's proposed already today to the Scottish Parliament. Some of those measures will come in on Friday, the end of this week. So just finally, before we go, if you would like to help us make more programmes and extend the range of programmes, and indeed maybe even help, because we also have our own skill shortage that you might be able to help with. First of all, you can donate. If you go to the website on there, you could consider becoming one of our subscribers if you're not already. And if I'm speaking to one of our subscribers, it's great to have you with us, so thanks for your support. Please pass it on. And one of the things we would like to do going forward into the new year is to employ people. We've got all the equipment ready here, and we need more trained, skilled hands to get on it and extend the range of programmes. So thanks for helping, and if you can help any more, or if you know anyone who could help us, then please do that. And just finally, it's great to have Peter Curran on the programme again. It's very good to have your insights and your anecdotes, Peter. So thanks for joining us again.
And thanks, Hugh, and I'm going to go out and look in the bins and see if there's any ginger bottles.
That's right, yeah. Start saving them up. It's all a hedge against the future. So a bit late, but that's it from us on Broadcasting Scotland tonight. So I'll be back tomorrow with tomorrow's news at Scotland on 7. So thanks for joining us and see you later.